guys in the dark.
This goes back to 2009. I was a senior in high school, and prom was right around the corner. I was single at the time, but kind of on again, off again with a gal. She asked if I'd like to take her to the prom. I said, yeah, sure, why not? The week before, of course, she canceled. She wasn't going and didn't want to have to mess with it all, whatever. Most of my friends, except two, were going. One, in fact, wasn't from the same school. Come the day, of course, I kind of got bummed out, even if not initially. So I made up with these two guys, Dave and Jake, that evening. Jake somehow managed to get a 12-pack of Busch and a bottle of vodka, despite being 18 years old. The plan was to take Dave's car and go cruising, find a party to crash after the prom, and get tore up. I didn't really drink heavily, and still don't, but was feeling pretty shitty. Didn't even care, though. We stopped by Dave's sister's house to get a CD, a Misfits CD. Jake and I wait in the car while Dave's rummaging through the house. While in the car shooting the shit, Jake gets a call on his phone. From our buddy Mark from school. Apparently some guy, or guys, had been trying to put the moves on the gal he was trying to go to prom with, and he stepped in to say something about it outside and took a punch to the eye. Now, Mark is a nice guy. He's pretty passive, but looks like trouble. He wore a short mohawk and looked almost like Heroin Bob from SLC Punk. This isn't the type of thing that usually goes on in his life. It was, however, in mine. I got into a lot of pretty stupid fights in high school. Apparently the guys, 3 of them, told him if he wanted to talk about it further to meet them behind the school. So he's calling us. He doesn't want to look like a pussy in front of his girl and needs a hand. We got nothing better to do. So we make the decision for Dave before he has the chance to agree or object to it. Dave didn't seem to mind one way or another. We all kind of honestly thought if we showed up outnumbering them, they would just back down anyways. So we get there, meet up with Mark, who's pacing around outside, smoking a cigarette. Rather than waste time, we just agree to get this over with and go around behind the school. Unsurprisingly, given the event, it's crowded as hell, even behind the school. People are standing around smoking, making out, puking, things like that. Off to the left, across the parking lot, is a fairly narrow alley leading behind an office building and a church. Mark suggests they're probably there, if they're still there at all. We agree and casually stroll into the alley. Mark's leading the way, all decked out for prom in a goddamn tuxedo. Now, to frame this part, here more accurately, this alley is narrow enough for all 4 of us. We can't stand shoulder to shoulder in it. Only 3 of us can fit at once, so we had Dave right behind us. Mark wastes no time and yells, "Hey assholes, I'm back," as we're entering the alleyway. He didn't need to, though. There's no way that they wouldn't have noticed us coming. It doesn't take long. There's no squaring up, no shit being flung. It just starts. A scuffle. It's dark in the alley with only the light from the parking lot behind us spilling in. It's a tight fit, with even 3 people in here, and there are a total of 7 of us together swinging at each other, cussing all the way, and bottles breaking somewhere along the way, that at the time I remember thinking one of them was thrown at us. In short, it's utter chaos in the alley. It's hard to even discern friend from foe. It didn't last long, though. Not only were the guys outnumbered, but apparently drunk to boot, which was probably why this all started to begin with. 2 of them ended up pushing past us after a pretty good beating and bolted across the parking lot. One even tripped and fell straight to his face on the concrete, but scrambled back up and then kept going. That got Jake to start laughing his ass off. I was trying to tend to some swollen, probably broken knuckles, and Marcus cussing up a storm because he ripped the sleeve of his rented tux somewhere in that madness. One of the guys got knocked out cold, and I mean he's out, snoring deeply. If you've ever seen someone get knocked out, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's not normal snoring, but like loud, deep snoring. He's just laid out cold in his back, in a fucking suit, laying amongst trash and dirt. I ask if we could drag him out into the parking lot so someone can find him. But Dave says, nah, fuck him. So we start to pile out of the alley with Mark saying, hold on, give me a minute, he'll catch up. We hear a zipper and turn around to see him with his back to us. He's pissing on this guy. at which point Jake is almost doubled over laughing so hard that he's wheezing. Mark gets done, zips up, comes back outside still cussing about his sleeve, thanks us, tells us to meet him back at his place afterwards. So we split off with Jake barely able to control himself the whole time, randomly bursting back into fits of laughter. It catches on, and I follow him in the laughter. It honestly gets pretty funny. Mark pissing on the guy, snoring so loud he could have set off a car alarm. The only one not laughing is Dave, who took a pretty good blast to the head and is complaining of a headache. We take off in his car, though, and intend to just go back to his place and hang out until after prom. Along the way, he stops at McDonald's, buys a few burgers, and asks if we want any. The night drags by from there. We do end up going to Mark's place after the prom, but don't stay too long, as he kind of politely shoos us out so he can spend some alone time with his date. We're going to call it a night, but Dave says he hasn't noticed that we touched our booze in his trunk. But there's no way that we can even take it out, let alone drink it near his place, because his dad will beat him. Jake's mom doesn't even know that he's gone, and hates Dave anyways from a previous incident involving booze. My house isn't going to work either. So Dave decides that we'll just drive to this abandoned movie theater a few blocks over and stand around outside. We agree, and that's exactly what we do. The idea that the police could find us here drinking becomes clear. Dave decides to park on the block behind the movie theater with us walking through a small little clearing of woods leading up behind the building. We'd been standing near the side of the front of the building, cracking jokes, and still laughing about Mark pissing in the guy on the alleyway. I wasn't drinking much, don't really like beer, so I just had a few pulls from the vodka bottle. Jake was getting wobbly-legged, and Dave had already stopped, feeling a bit lightheaded. Suddenly, bright headlights pour into the parking lot. A car comes slowly rolling in. It's about 20 feet away, and turned with the passenger door to us. Dave says he thinks it's the police, and to be ready to bolt back through the woods. Something that's probably not going to be real easy for Jake. It's not the police, though. It's a sedan of some sort. And a guy leans out the window, yells, "What the fuck are you little faggots doing here on my lot?" Jake, ever the badass, of course, yells back telling him to fuck off. The guy starts to slide back into the car, and then opens the door to let himself out. The driver turns off the engine. The guy getting out yells back, "What the fuck did you just say to me?" Jake kind of wobbles for a second, then pushes past me, and yells at the top of his lungs, "I said to go fuck yourself!" and launches a half-full bottle of vodka at the car. It falls short and smashes several feet in front of the guy. Then all of the doors open, and the driver and 3 more guys from the back seat come pouring out. One of them has a baseball bat. Without even hesitating, I just grab Jake's collar and slap Dave on the shoulder and say, "It's time to go now." We take off towards the woods. We hear them start running behind us as we come crashing through the bushes leading into the woods. Jake is stumbling all over the place to the point where I'm having to hold onto his shirt sleeve to ensure that he isn't taking a dive. We get to the car, which is luckily unlocked, and dive inside. As we kind of half-assed toss Jake into the back seat, he's laughing like an asshole as he tumbles in. Dave's starting up the car as we all turn and realize they don't follow us all the way. At least if they did, we can't see them. The woods aren't thick enough to really hide too well in, but it is pretty dark. At this point, it's probably after midnight. There are only 2 ways out of the block. One goes all the way around the entire neighborhood, and the other is behind us. It goes back around the front to the movie theater. We decide to just go back that way as fast as we can. We probably should have went the long way around, but none of us were completely thinking straight, or even really sober at that point. As we come around the bend leading in front of the movie theater, the sedan is coming out of the lot. Not even 3 feet from Dave's care as he passes by. I'm sitting in the front seat, making eye contact with the passenger from the sedan. He's got a shaved head and is shirtless. He just flashes me this evil grin as he points at us and says something to the driver. They pull out right behind us and are on Dave's ass. The passenger is leaning out his window, yelling something that I can't hear over the Misfits CD in the car, and then throws something that clunks off the roof of the car, going and shattering all over the hood. A tall boy beer can. We're coming up on the 3-lane highway that's dead empty, and these guys start to speed up and try to pull up alongside my side of the car and swerve onto us. Dave panics and hits the brake, which causes them to slightly clip his front bumper and bolt ahead of us. He then starts forward again and tries to slip behind them into the other lane. They cut him off, start to pull up against us again. This time on the driver's side. The passenger is hanging out the window again, this time almost sitting on the door, and rears back and swings something towards the car. It's the baseball bat. He misses, and the car swerves for a moment. Dave is wide-eyed and mutters, "Oh shit, oh fuck." Even Jake has quit laughing at this point. The car swerves back, and Dave is trying to move to the far end of the lane. The passenger swings again and connects sort of with the driver door. It clips the rearview mirror and knocks it back. Dave rolls down his window and in desperation throws the only things that he has at hand back at the guy. First was the CD case, which misses the passenger and shatters against the top rim of the door. Then a handful of as much loose change as he could grab from his console. Quarters, nickels, dimes, and pennies go flying. Some of it hits the passenger in the face and arms. Some sails into the car, some missing entirely. That seems to have some sort of effect on the passenger, which pulls back into the car, and Dave floors it. Another minute or two goes like this. As we're coming to an intersection with another car at the light, Dave begins to slow down and turn on his signal to turn into the parking lot of a Quick Trip gas station. As soon as the car stops, just get out calmly and quickly, and we go inside. This is a police substation. It's safe. Just take a leak, buy a soda or something. Don't act like anything is up, Dave says as he pulls in front of the store. We get out and dart inside. Jake goes into the bathroom and is in there for a while. Dave and I buy a soda and some bottled water. The clerk asks us if we went to prom, how it was, things like that. We keep small talk with him, hoping Jake didn't pass out on the toilet. He finally comes stumbling out of the bathroom, grinning. The clerk observes him. "Looks like you guys had fun." Dave nervously forces out a chuckle and says he's not feeling so well. It's kind of hot outside, which it was. Our friends have pulled into the back of the parking lot behind the gas pumps and are sitting there idling. Dave notices and nods to them for me to notice. I decide to try and stall some time, ask for directions to a Taco Bell that I know full well is on the other side of town, saying we were trying to meet some friends there. The clerk is thinking on that for a moment, starts to give pretty detailed directions there as we notice the sedan apparently give it up after having sat there for a few minutes. We wait for the guy to finish, thank him, then pick up a pack of Wintermint gum that we forgot, just to make sure, and pass another minute of time or so. After getting back into the car, Dave said that he's going to drop me off, then sneak Jake in through his back door to sleep it off until the morning. And that's that. We luckily didn't run into the crazy guys in the sedan again, and that ended a night that even 13 years later I'll never forget. And that's how my high school senior prom went. The drunks in the sedan. We never did meet again, and I really hope that we never do. At 14, I moved in with my estranged father in a rural town in the United States. I found myself, a former city kid, living in a farmhouse on a plot of land that was half a mile from the main road, surrounded by acres of forest on all sides. It was lonely and isolated. A few handymen, who I assumed were buddies of my father or something, were working on various projects around the property. One guy was named Dan, was being paid a few $100s to dig a very large hole behind the house. One evening, while my father was away on business, Dan rolled up in his truck. That's a bit odd, but he probably made a scheduling error. I met him at the door to tell him that my dad wasn't home, and to try back tomorrow. My father had a very strict rule the guys were worked on the property who had to call him first, before they even came around. They were never supposed to show up unannounced. When I told him my father wasn't home, I was sure he would just leave immediately. Instead, the expression on his face changed suddenly. He perked up and smiled. He had very dark brown eyes that were set close together, and he stared with purpose. In hindsight, I'd say his stare was predatory. Also, looking back, I'm fairly embarrassed by how naive and silly my answers to his questions were. I guess at 14, I was still trying hard to fit in, and was excessively polite. There was a screen door between us. He reached out and opened it, so that he was holding the door in one hand while he talked to me. He started asking how I liked living in the area. Then he asked about how I liked high school. I politely told him that everything was going well so far. "Are you going to the prom?" he asked me. I had noticed around this time that his smile and dark stare were bothering me. There was something very deliberate, almost practiced, about his questions, as if they were all just part of a memorized script. The wide smirk on his face never went away. "I'm sure someone has asked you to the prom," he said. I don't think so. "I'm just a sophomore, but I'm allowed to go if I go with an older student," I told him. "I bet you have lots of boyfriends, right?" "No, I just moved here." He didn't pick up on the obvious social cues I was sending him to leave me alone. I felt that sickness in my stomach, the nauseating and overwhelming sensation of terror. Despite keeping my cool, my mind had begun to spin crazy theories at me. What would I do if he planned on raping me? I was so far away from civilization, no one could hear me if I screamed at the top of my lungs. My mind raced through all of the angles, the possibilities, the skills I should employ in this situation. "I can be your boyfriend," he said, still smirking. "And again, I'd like to take you to the prom." I laughed a bit. "No, thank you." He took a step closer, as if he was just about to step right over me and inside the house. "What are you, about 16? He was now looking me over, and I mean looking me over, his eyes traced up and down. I felt like as if his gaze had left a slime trail across my body. "Not yet. I'm turning 15, I answered, at this point hoping he would just go away when he found out how young I really was. "Oh, that's okay," he assures me. "I like younger girls. I've had a lot of girlfriends who were your age. Are you sure you're not 16? You really look mature for your age." "Yeah, I'm sure," I told him, still laughing off his comments while feeling absolutely trapped. "Look, I think you should go, because my dad could come home at any minute, and you know, he hates when people show up unannounced. And he especially doesn't like visitors after he's been on the road all day. You know how he gets pissed about that." He shrugged. "Oh, it's okay. I talked to him yesterday. Told him I'd be coming by to finish up the job. And he said he'd be home a little late. We can wait for him together, talk some more." While he never said he wanted me to invite him into the house, everything about his body language and gaze indicated that he expected me to ask him to step inside. He was practically leaning right through the frame door. There was no way I was going to let him in, even though, looking back on it, that wouldn't have really mattered. It didn't immediately hit me. What he had just said, and what is implied, that he talked to my father, and knew he wouldn't be home until late, so what the fuck was he doing here? He went on some more about how he would take me to the prom, how he would pay for it, and treat me nice. What a nice girl I was. How beautiful young girls like me are at this age. And there are no locks in that screen door. The wooden door was warped and had a clunky lock that took a while, and a bit of shoving to engage, so I just stood there and listened to this pervert. He presses again. "Don't you want a boyfriend?" "No, look, I don't date guys who are older, just high school boys. It'd be really weird if someone your age went to the prom." I should explain that he looked about 45. "You shouldn't say that," he smiles at me. "Age doesn't matter. I've been with lots of teenage women. Some girls are very experienced, sexually, before they're 16. You seem like you've already had a lot of experiences to me. You're one of those types who is a grown woman in a younger woman's body, right?" I don't quite remember all of my dumb responses to him, but I remember very clearly his pressing the point that age is just a number, and that young girls were sexual goddesses, that older women were bitter and angry, and he loved how happy and self-assured young teen girls were. I clearly remember he said, "You don't have to decide whether you want to go to the prom with me right away. Let's hang out a bit first and get to know each other." I finally said something to the effect of, "I'm going back inside now. Have a good night. I'm probably going to call my dad to find out when he's coming home." There was no way that that was possible. This was before cell phones were even common, and I had no idea where my father was at that moment. He took my hand and kissed it, right between my first and second knuckles. I wanted to vomit. He said, "Okay, I'll be going then. I hope to see you soon, princess." Princess? I withdrew inside, relieved that he was going. I watched him walk down to his truck in the driveway, started up, and back out of our driveway. So I didn't bother trying to lock the door. Instead, I went to my room on the second floor. My window looked out upon a small stretch of the dirt road that led to the main road. The truck, which was a white pickup, exited the driveway, but pulled over, further back on the road. I could just see the tail end of it. It remained parked there without the lights on. I was confused. He had pulled out, then pulled to the side of the dirt road behind some bushes. But from that second floor window, I could see clearly that he had gone no more than 50 feet from the driveway. The truck remained there for about 20 minutes. I like to think that he wasn't trying to hide his truck from me. But I had been on the first floor. It would have appeared that he had driven away. When my father came home later that night, I told him about Dan's visit. My father wasn't outraged on my behalf, perhaps sort of bemused. He was more pissed about Dan being around the house at all. He said I fired him last week. He knows better than to be around here, and he should be calling first. So my father called up Dan, cursed him out for coming to the house when he had been specifically told not to return, threatening him with physical violence if he ever shows up on his property again. He added, "And don't talk to my daughter while she's here alone. You scared her." I learned later why my father had a rule about the guys who worked on the property, and why they always had to call first before coming over. He was mainly worried that they would rob him, because the guys he hired were all ex-cons who charged a discounted, under-the-table rate. Most of them, including Dan, were on parole for violent crimes, and had very few job prospects elsewhere. Dan had been recently released from prison, and my father didn't trust him. I don't know what his crimes were, but I can take a guess. I heard he returned to prison about a year later. So, to set this up, it was the night of prom, and me and about 5 other girls, all around 17 and 18 years old, pretty much all black, had left the venue and were driving around aimlessly, hoping to catch a party to go to. Every place that we went to ended up being a bust, or getting busted by cops. So we were heading to go hang out with some friends around 2 to 3 a.m. It's important to note that none of us were inebriated in any manner. So by this time of the night, the roads are almost completely empty. We live in Northern Virginia, and it's incredibly dark as the car had broken high beams. The driver, Key, made a turn down a road, and seeing as it was incredibly dark, briefly drove in the wrong lane. It only lasted around 5 seconds or so, and absolutely no one was on the street, so she just calmly corrected herself. Right as she made it to the correct lane, a car about 50 to 100 feet behind us turns on his headlights and lays on the horn. It seemed like this guy appeared out of nowhere, and I found it incredibly strange he didn't have his headlights on, as it was a new moon and almost completely dark. So she waves her hand out the window and says sorry, but the guy was just not having it. He immediately sped up, riding our tail and honking almost constantly, to the point we were going 60 in a 30 zone. He was in a huge black truck, waving a Confederate flag out of the back, and we were in a tiny green Kia, so we were understandably terrified. He ended up actually ramming our bumper a few times, although not enough to dent the car or move it, thankfully. We're debating what to do, whether we should call the cops or not, when Key takes a sharp turn and ends up losing the guy to stop in a parking lot. We wait super quietly under this shady tree, ready to drive off or call the police, or even both for a few minutes. One of my friends suddenly notices his truck parked a few parking lots away, separated by a few trees in the way, that we can see him. But we were hoping that he couldn't see us. I don't have the best eyesight, but even I could see him jump out of the car. This guy was massive, wide, and tall, holding something in his arms and waving it around. Another friend with more gun experience than I points it out. Looks like it could be a shotgun. We wait for a few seconds, paralyzed in fear, as he yells something along the lines of, "Y'all ins, come out now!" After we all wizened up, Key put the car into drive and sped out of the parking lot as fast as we could. We were visibly shaken and immediately went home, so we could safely freak the fuck out, making sure to see if he was following us the whole way there. So, hey, racist redneck rampager, I hope that I never see you ever again. My prom happened almost 2 years ago, and my group of friends and I decided to book a limousine to go to the banquet hall as people normally did. My one friend, Wendy, volunteered to take the initiative to have the responsibility to book and coordinate the limousine company and the driver. We all split the cost between the 6 of us. Wendy paid the limousine company, and we paid her back. She paid the limousine company with her credit card, and the fees included tip, gratuity for the driver. This is important to remember because out of the group of 8 people, Wendy was the only one who was communicating directly with the limousine people over email and phone for about 3 to 4 weeks beforehand. It's prom day, and the limo arrives to Wendy's house where we all are taking photos. The driver is a very tall, slim man with curly hair. He introduces himself to us and our parents. I immediately get an off vibe from him, but maybe that was just because he was quite honestly reminding me of a comedian known as Carrot Top. He talks to Wendy and her mom, and everything is ready to go. He asked us general questions on the way to the banquet hall. It was trying to make small talk with us, but we frankly just wanted to talk amongst ourselves. We arrive at the prom, and Wendy tells the driver to be there by 10 p.m. to pick us up to go home. Great, no problem. The plan to go home was essentially the same as the pickup. We were all to be dropped off at Wendy's house, and our parents would get us from there. As we were leaving prom, and literally walking into the limousine, Wendy informs us that she was going to an after party in a different town with a different group of people. This was out of the blue, and completely threw us off because there was no mention of this beforehand. I was pissed off because she made this plan without telling any of us, and the 5 of us are literally inside of the limo at this point. And at this point, she is standing outside of it. She tells the limo driver to drop us all off at my house because I live the closest to her. She waves us goodbye, and we were all sitting tensely while the driver drives away, and I give the driver my address. A moment passes, and he offers to drop us off individually at our homes, so the rest wouldn't have to be picked up from one house. I immediately decline without hesitation, and to be honest, I don't remember why I said no so quickly. He proceeded to persuade everyone else that it would be easier for them and more convenient since I lived on the far south side of town, and we were coming in from the north. Everyone else lived in a trickle-down pattern from north to south, with my house being the very last on the route. He said it wouldn't be a problem for him because everyone would get off along the way. I asked him if it was going to be an extra charge because it wasn't the original agreement that Wendy paid for, but he insisted on it. Clearly my friends thought this was best, and agreed, but I truly had a gut feeling that this wasn't a good idea. It's around 11 p.m. now, and he dropped off friends 1, 2, and 3, and then it was 4, and myself in the limo. Before she left the car when we were in front of her house, she could tell that I was uneasy because for the next 5 to 7 minutes or so until my house, I was going to be alone with the driver. She told me to message her as soon as I got home. She left, and he proceeded to drive to my house, trying to make more small talk. I texted my mom that I was almost home, and he pulled up to the front of my house. I tried my best to be quick and slick to get the heck out of the car, and said thank you so very much, have a good night, while I flung my legs out of the car. I got out, and he also got out of the car, and I started to shake a little bit. He called out very sternly, "Did Wendy not give you an envelope for me?" No, she didn't. Well, there was supposed to be an envelope for me with my tip. If Wendy was supposed to give you a tip, she probably took it with her by accident. Bullshit, he said louder, and was walking up to me to my driveway, and I was walking backwards up to my door. At this point, my mother, thank God, came out and was standing on the grass behind me. He shouted very angrily, "I dropped all of you off individually, and you expected me to do it without a tip?" He showed no sign of stopping as he was approaching me and my mom quickly. My mother told me to quickly go inside, and as soon as I did, I closed the door. I watched him storm back into his car, saying expletives, and speed down the road. Call me shallow, but I definitely judged this man by his appearance at the beginning of the evening, but I knew it was my gut intuition telling me this guy was a freak. I feared being alone as a 17-year-old girl, alone in a car with a complete and off-putting stranger, and knew accepting his offer was a bad idea. I was paranoid that he would come back because he knew where I lived, and clearly had no issue with following me out of the car. I was shaken for the rest of the night. Now I never take an Uber or taxi alone. So to the intimidating freak limo driver that followed me out of the car to my door, I hope I never see you again. So a little background first. My senior year, I was the battalion commander at my ROTC unit. This means I pretty much knew every single cadet, whether I wanted to or not. In my class, there was one individual who was a sophomore and 18 years old. He never bathed and always smelled awful, so needless to say, I never got close enough to have a conversation. About a month before my senior prom, I was without a date and very angry. My mother's friend had a son that was in my grade level, and although we hated each other, I ended up taking him to the prom. That night, as soon as we stepped through the door, he ditched me, which was fine. I worked the room and danced with some friends. But when the slow dances started, I was all alone. I started moving back to the lobby area, but I bumped into this cadet from my class, John. John was in a very nice tuxedo, smelled like a flower bed, and had on a very cute smile. I told him that he looked great, and we started talking. As we have never had a conversation before. The second slow dance was starting, and he asked me to dance, but my date was anxious to leave. I gave John my number right in front of my date and told him to text me. In the weeks that followed, John did text me, a lot. At first, he would tell me that I was pretty, and all that kind of stuff, and I ate it up. But then it started to get weird. John would ask me very invasive questions about my sex life and sexual partners. When I told him that I was a virgin, he told me that it made him very happy. I started getting the creepy vibes from him, so I told him he needed to back off a little bit. He didn't, so the next day, in class, I looked him directly in the eyes and told him to just back off. He looked sad, said he understood, and then asked for a hug. I just walked away. Fast forward a few weeks. He continues to text me, and I continue to ignore him. One night after graduation, I'm laying on my bed, playing a video game. I get a text, see that it's him, and after reading it, I ignore it. I get another text from him shortly after that says, "Hey, I can see your house. Which window is yours?" I immediately bolt up and close my blinds. I call him and scream at him that if he isn't gone in 5 minutes, I will call the cops. He did leave, and after that, I blocked his number, told him that any further contact would be reported to an authoritative figure. Thankfully, that was the end of that. He still occasionally tries to friend me on Facebook, but I never accept it. So back in high school, I was a rather shy girl. This was during and after the recession, and my family had gotten a bit tight on money. Usually I didn't eat lunch, and I had to hide the fact of that from the staff at the school, so I studied in the library or sat outside of the field behind the school for lunch. Rarely had I ever eaten or sat in the lunchroom. As the school year went on, and near its end, prom was coming up. I never had enough money for a prom dress, so I always turned down any offers to go, simply because I didn't want people to know that I couldn't afford a dress, let alone the ticket to get in. Between classes, when I had to walk through the cafeteria, I noticed that there was a younger boy who would always stare at me. His friend would pat his shoulder, and I read one of their lips as they told him to go ask her. The group of boys just looked and smiled, except for the nervous one simply staring at me. I would look away to the floor and grip my textbooks closer to my chest, walking down another hallway. Anyways, I kept finding ways to sort of get past him without him noticing. Now I know this sounds mean, but I didn't know him. I couldn't afford it, and I also felt like he was dark inside. It was like every time I saw him, all I saw was gray smoke around him, and there was a really uneasy feeling about it. Anyway, prom happened, and I lived right down the street from the high school, so I could hear the music and see all the kids driving down the road or walking to school in their cool new clothing. As I sat there looking at the lights and the kids, I decided it was stupid to just watch the event happen without me, so I made myself go to sleep. A week or so after prom, I heard other kids in school talking about something, almost whispering. Apparently the boy who wanted to ask me out to prom, he ended up asking another girl from another school. She said yes, but when he showed up to her house, her dad didn't like him and said that she shouldn't go with him. The boy then told the girl he wouldn't go to prom with her because something had come up and that he wouldn't be going to prom with her. The father and the boy talked about it, and the father said that if he paid for a portion of her dress, then they could go. The kid went back to the house and cut the screen to the back door with a knife, Then he unlocked it. Her father woke up and asked him what he was doing there. The boy said, "I came to see you die," before charging at the father with a knife and a shovel. He managed to stab her dad 7 times. Her parents subdued the kid, and he was arrested and released on a $10,000 bond. The rest is history. So that's my prom night story. Oh yeah, the dad did survive, which was great. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.